Angela Prichard was born on April 14, 1967, in Dubuque, Iowa, to Barbara and William Odafe. She was one of 5 children in a tight-knit, loving family where every voice was heard and every child felt valued. From an early age, Angela showed the nurturing spirit that would define her entire life. She would grow up to become a devoted mother to 2 sons, Joshua Close and C.J. Hancock, and later a grandmother to 6 grandchildren who were the absolute light of her life. Her family described her as someone who was beautiful inside and out and lived to make everyone around her happy. She loved to spoil the grandkids rotten, and they could do no wrong in her eyes, her son C.J. would later recall. Angela was the type of mother who still decorated her Christmas tree with the handmade ornaments her children had created decades earlier, treasuring every memory and milestone. After years of focusing on her family, Angela found her professional calling at Mississippi Ridge Boarding Kennels. She worked for longtime owners Jim and Nancy Kettman before eventually leasing and operating the business herself. She fit everything that we were looking for, Jim Kettman would testify during the trial. Angela threw herself into her work with the same passion she brought to everything else in her life. The kennel became more than just a business to her. It was a place where she could care for beloved family pets while their owners were away, providing them with the same love and attention she would give her own animals. It was in this context of rebuilding her life and finding new purpose that Angela met Christopher Pritchard. Chris was an established electrician in Bellevue, a longtime resident who seemed to offer stability and companionship. Angela's sister Wendy Buddy and her husband Jim had known Christopher for years and considered him trustworthy. "I would have trusted him with our children. He was nice, friendly, sincere, a hard worker, fun to be around," Wendy would later testify. After dating for about 2 years, Angela and Christopher married in March 2019. What seemed like a perfect match, a hardworking electrician and a caring kennel operator, would slowly reveal itself to be something far darker. In the beginning, Christopher appeared to be everything Angela needed. He was financially stable, well-regarded in the community, and seemed to genuinely care for her. The couple settled into married life, with Angela continuing to run the kennel, while Christopher maintained his electrical business. But the truth was far from the facade they presented to the world. According to court records and witness testimony, Christopher had a history that should have raised red flags. In November 2019, he had been arrested on a charge of first-degree theft. Instead of facing consequences, the police allegedly acquiesced to his release on bail and to an astounding 31 continuances in the case over the next 4 years. Those continuances, Angela's family would later argue in a lawsuit, enabled Christopher Pritchard to remain free of custody and emboldened him to repeatedly harass and assault Angela Marie Pritchard. The relationship that had seemed so promising began to show cracks in the spring of 2022. Angela's sister Wendy noticed the changes immediately. He was turning into a different person, very angry. You could see the changes. Angela started to get very scared, upset, worried, Wendy testified during Christopher's trial. What had started as occasional arguments escalated into something much more sinister. Christopher became controlling, possessive, and increasingly violent. But Angela, like so many domestic violence victims, found herself trapped in a cycle of abuse that was difficult to escape. The woman who had spent her life caring for others was now living in fear, documenting her terror in the only way she knew how. Angela had always been organized, someone who kept track of everything in her life. Her sister Wendy remembered her fondly. She was notorious for sticky notes for everything. But these weren't reminders about daily tasks or grocery lists. Angela's brightly colored sticky notes told a much darker story. They became her diary of domestic abuse, documenting Christopher's escalating rage and her growing terror. One note, written shortly before her death, revealed the depth of her fear. "I think Chris is capable of anything. He told my sister he didn't care if he went to jail. He put guns all over upstairs in 3 different rooms." These weren't dramatic exaggerations. They were the desperate observations of a woman who knew her life was in danger. Angela had discovered that Christopher had placed multiple firearms throughout their home, a threatening display that served as a constant reminder of what he was capable of. As Christopher's behavior became increasingly erratic and dangerous, Angela reached a breaking point. "I'm done. This is it. We're not living in the same house," she told her sister Wendy. Angela made the courageous decision to leave Christopher and moved in with Wendy for safety. But leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time for victims, and Christopher wasn't going to let her go easily. What followed was a campaign of harassment, stalking, and intimidation that would last for months, and despite Angela's repeated pleas for help, the system designed to protect her would fail her at every turn. On April 18, 2022, Christopher's violence escalated to the point where Angela's family called the police. When officers arrived, they found Angela crying and visibly shaking with a mark on her face. "He hit me, and then I came in the house," Angela told the responding officer, captured on body camera footage. "You have no idea what I go through every single day with him. No idea," she continued, her voice filled with desperation and fear. Christopher was arrested for domestic violence, and a no-contact order was issued, but this would be just the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself for months. Angela calling for help, Christopher violating court orders, and the system failing to adequately protect her. Over the next several months, Angela discovered hidden cameras in her home and a tracking device in her Jeep, clear violations of Iowa's anti-stalking and invasion of privacy laws. When she reported these findings to the Bellevue Police Department, they allegedly refused to take action. Christopher's harassment continued to escalate. On August 23, 2022, he sent threatening text messages to Angela, stating, "It is going to get real fucking ugly." 5 days later, he told her he intended to destroy her business. Each time Angela reported these violations to the police, they allegedly took no action. On September 1, 2022, Angela was granted a temporary restraining order against Christopher. It should have been a lifeline, a legal barrier to keep her safe. Instead, it became another piece of paper that Christopher would violate repeatedly, while authorities looked the other way. What should have been a straightforward case of enforcing legal protections became a tragic example of how the system can fail domestic violence victims. Over the next 13 days after the restraining order was issued, Angela reported at least 9 alleged violations of the order to the Bellevue Police Department. Christopher drove past her home multiple times, including 6 times in 1 hour. He showed up at her workplace to cut the grass. He confronted her at a gas station, simply staring at her in a display of intimidation. When Angela reported that her home had been vandalized, the doors bolted, utilities shut off, police allegedly found Christopher's actions to be violations of the restraining order, but still refused to arrest him. When Angela contacted Bellevue Police Chief Dennis Schroeder to report violations, Schroeder allegedly refused to enforce the order and instead advised Angela to contact an attorney. The police department's inaction was later attributed to Christopher's personal relationships with officers. According to the lawsuit filed by Angela's family, Christopher had a personal relationship with one or more of the city police officers, and the fact that he had provided officers with electrical services at no cost or for a reduced fee. These alleged conflicts of interest meant that Christopher believed he could violate court orders without consequences. The lawsuit claimed that police plainly transmitted the message to Christopher Pritchard that what he did was permissible and would not cause him to be held accountable. On September 15, 2022, Christopher was finally arrested for violating the restraining order, but he spent only 1 night in jail before being released. He then failed to show up for court hearings and failed to turn himself in for his 6-day violation sentence. An arrest warrant was issued for Christopher on September 30, 2022. 9 days before Angela's murder, the Jackson County attorney warned the Bellevue Police Department in an email that Christopher had 24 hours to turn himself in. "If he does not report, I will be requesting a warrant." The warrant was never served. In a small town like Bellevue, Christopher was easy to find, but no one went looking for him. Angela, feeling increasingly unsafe, had moved in with her sister Wendy. "I was like, you have a shadow now because I'm not leaving. You're stuck with me," Wendy told her, trying to provide the protection that the legal system had failed to give. But Christopher knew Angela's routines. He knew where she worked, and he knew when she would be there. On the evening of October 7, 2022, Christopher Pritchard made his final preparations. He drove to a barn belonging to family friends Lori and Mike Blazer, just a few miles from Mississippi Ridge Boarding Kennels. He parked a borrowed white pickup truck inside their garage and left a handwritten note. "Keys are in the truck if you need to move it. I'll be back. Chris." The note mentioned that he had gone hunting, a convenient excuse that would give him time to execute his plan. From the barn, Christopher trekked through the woods in the middle of the night, carrying his 20-gauge shotgun. Surveillance cameras at the kennel would later reveal the moment he arrived. The dog started barking in the darkness. You can hear dogs start to bark in the middle of the night. We had determined that was most likely the point when he arrived at the kennels. Special Agent Dustin Henningsen from the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation would later explain. Christopher knew the layout of the kennel intimately. He had helped Angela run the business, and he knew how to get inside. For nearly 4 hours, he waited in the darkness, surrounded by the animals that Angela loved, planning to ambush his estranged wife when she arrived for work. At 7:34 a.m. on October 8, 2022, Angela pulled into the parking lot of Mississippi Ridge Boarding Kennels. Security cameras captured her getting out of her vehicle and gathering her belongings before walking toward the entrance. She was dressed for another normal day of caring for the dogs she loved. Pulling up to the kennel at 7:34, you can see her get out of her vehicle and she's gathering her belongings and then walking into the kennel itself, Agent Henningsen would later describe while reviewing the footage. Angela had less than 6 minutes to live. As she entered the kennel and began her morning routine, Christopher emerged from his hiding place with the shotgun. Angela immediately recognized the danger she was in and tried to call 911. The call that followed would provide investigators with crucial evidence and give Angela the chance to name her own killer. At 7:39 and 43 seconds, the Mississippi Ridge Boarding Kennels became a crime scene. The 911 call that began at that moment would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. Angela's voice, filled with terror and desperation, can be heard pleading with her estranged husband. "Please, get out of here. I have customers coming in. Please get out of here." And then, in her final moments, she named the man who was about to kill her. "Will you please get out of here, Chris?" The sound of a gunshot followed immediately, captured on the 911 recording. Angela Prichard was shot dead center in the chest and died within seconds, according to the medical examiner's testimony. Essentially, you're listening to the end of her life on the 911 call, Agent Henningsen would later reflect. On a personal level, it's a very difficult thing to listen to someone's end-of-life moments. But Angela's final word, "Chris," would prove to be the key that unlocked the entire case. Those were the last words spoken by Angela, and the first clue investigators had to identify her killer. After shooting Angela, Christopher took her cell phone and fled the scene. He left behind a woman who had spent her life caring for others, now lying dead among the animals she had loved and protected. When law enforcement arrived at Mississippi Ridge Boarding Kennels, they found a scene that told a clear story. Angela Prichard lay dead from a gunshot wound to the chest, surrounded by the boarding dogs who had witnessed the horrific crime. Dozens of investigators from 6 different law enforcement agencies descended on the scene, with body cameras rolling to document every detail. The small Bellevue Police Department, with just several officers, invited the state police to lead the investigation. Special Agents Ryan Kedley and Dustin Henningsen from Iowa's Department of Criminal Investigation took charge of the case. While Angela's family was convinced that Christopher was responsible, the agents needed to build an airtight case. The 911 call provided the first crucial piece of evidence, but investigators needed more. They analyzed surveillance footage from the kennel and surrounding areas, which revealed the timeline of events and confirmed that Christopher had been lying in wait for hours. The investigation revealed that this appeared to be an assailant that knew her very well, as Agent Kedley noted. The level of planning and knowledge of Angela's routines pointed directly to her estranged husband. Meanwhile, the manhunt for Christopher Pritchard was already underway. After shooting Angela, Christopher fled into the Iowa wilderness. The manhunt that followed involved hundreds of officers searching farmland, woods, and neighborhoods across the area. "You've got a fugitive out there on the run, potentially armed," Agent Kedley noted. "There's hundreds of acres here of farmland and woods, and we have the Mississippi River not far away, so knowing that he could have went any direction really makes the search difficult." Heavily armed officers went house to house, barn to barn, searching for the man who had just committed murder, but Christopher's carefully planned escape route gave him a temporary advantage. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Lori and Mike Blazer, the couple whose barn Christopher had used to hide his getaway vehicle. "We walk in, notice this white pickup truck," Mike Blazer recalled. When they found the handwritten note Christopher had left, they initially thought nothing of it. "We knew Chris. He would tell us how much he loved Angela, how devastated he was that there was a restraining order." But when news broke about the shooting at the kennel, the Blazers immediately understood the significance of what they had found. "We knew the minute that there was a shooting at the kennel. Something had happened with Chris," Lori Blazer said. "We were concerned that this was a getaway vehicle for him in here because it was just so odd it had no reason to be here. I called 911 immediately." The Blazers' call provided investigators with crucial information about Christopher's location and planning. The handwritten note became key evidence of premeditation. After 16 hours on the run, Christopher Pritchard was finally cornered and arrested in the early morning hours of October 9, 2022. When police found him, he still had the murder weapon, the 20-gauge shotgun, and ammunition in his possession. His first words upon arrest would only strengthen the case against him. During his arrest and subsequent interrogation, Christopher initially tried to claim the shooting was an accident, but his story kept changing, and investigators quickly saw through his lies. In police interviews, Christopher claimed that the gun was leaning up against the cupboards. He went to retrieve a backpack, and it fell, and then that went off and shot her. But the physical evidence told a different story. At trial, an Iowa State medical examiner testified that the gunshot had a downward trajectory, meaning Christopher had the weapon in his hands and was standing when he fired. If this was an accident, why are you taking her cell phone, which is her only means of survival? Why aren't you calling for help yourself? Why aren't you rendering any type of aid for your wife? Agent Henningsen pointed out during the interrogation, Christopher's claim that Angela was only shot in the arm was also contradicted by evidence. Angela was shot dead center in the chest, testified the medical examiner, and died in seconds. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him, Christopher eventually admitted to the shooting, though he continued to claim it was an accident. He was charged with first-degree murder and robbery. The trial began on February 5, 2024, at the Jackson County Courthouse in Maquoketa. The prosecution presented a compelling case that included the chilling 911 call, surveillance footage, ballistics evidence, and testimony from Angela's family about the months of escalating abuse. Angela's sister, Wendy Buddy, testified about the sticky notes and diary entries that documented Angela's fear. "I tried not to let her out of my sight, to be honest," she said, describing how she had tried to protect her sister in the final months of her life. The jury also heard about Christopher's history of violating court orders and the police department's failure to enforce the restraining order and arrest warrant. After 4 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. "We were outside the courthouse, just kind of stretching. And you know, the jury is back," Wendy Buddy recalled. "That's got to be a good sign that they are back in less than an hour." On February 13, 2024, the jury returned with their verdict. Christopher Pritchard was found guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. "When they said it, it was just a big sigh of relief," Wendy Buddy said. On March 22, 2024, Christopher was sentenced to the mandatory punishment for first-degree murder in Iowa, life in prison without the possibility of parole.